we have 3 people having birthday today. Out of that, 2 are here. Happy birthday, Milind, Ajay, and also to Raja.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to dear one. Happy birthday to you. From good friends and true. From old friends and new. May good luck go with you and happiness too.
Thank you, guys. We are
Thank
missing
you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, everyone.
Happy birthday.
Raji, birthday babies. Milind.
Yes. Thank
Milind
you.
and Ajay.
Just as a piece of trivia, today is Sujata's birthday as well.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Happy
So convey happy birthday to her.
information.
Thank you.
Okay, coming to the book to be read in the month of July for August session, Milind and myself requested Raja to move to China, and China not the way we discuss, but in terms of people. And obviously, he selected three very good books. Out of them, 2 really competed. And finally, the book that got selected narrowly is Age of Ambition by Ivan Osnos. So this is a book we'll be reading in July for August session.
Great. I just want to add to that. Raja is not here to listen to the praise, but he takes his role very seriously. He sent me a short list of books on China. Can you guess how many? There were 37 books that he had chosen. And out of the 37, he's picked the 3 best. And what we have all done is picked the creme de la creme, Age of Ambition. So it's really a very good process that he's put us through.
Is the author is the editor of New Yorker, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And he got some national book award for this book as well, is what the description said that Raja had sent us. So we should be looking forward to it.
Now a bit about prelude to the Trevor.
Return to Mandela. Get up, Pototas does what it is, what it is, what it isn't. Looking for a leader that will get them out of change instead of following the governor, which convinces them. Get up, stand up, keep on talking. A little bit of humble, four-bet caution. Somewhere between X and Gandhi, rebel, protest, or all king copy. Yup, fight. Black subjects, ANC's your party. Are the majority, but never get it. Always white leaders have all the power and the wealth and do everything to keep it, and they won't stop. The police and army try to keep us down. Whites have 3/4 the wealth when they're 1/4 the amount. Apartheid for black schools and medicines are bad as third world. For whites, it's so much better it will make your head swirl. Stop the SEGREGATION segregation. Fighting racist since 1913 with the Land Act. Hassan, 9/10 of black land was taken by the government. Fat cats crushing. Lands out there can't tell me nothing. Whites give it to the people. Spread it across the country. Well, it's out there, now they can't tell me nothing. Give it to the people. Spread it across the country.
Can we go back? This is the moment. Today is the day. We'll fight till it's over, so we put our hands up. Cause apartheid can't hold us. apartheid can't hold us. Can't go back. This is the moment. Today is the day. We'll fight till it's over. So we put our hands up. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us.
Now, can we end apartheid? Denying of our civil right? I grew up wanting full equality, but that's what you get when Nelson raised you. We were pumped for the 94 election week. Mandela's got Kirk beat. The National Party's now weak, take it to the streets, and the ANC's back on its feet. Nah, Clark, don't get up now, it's no goodbye, we got a country to run. And the building's just begun, together is how we'll run. Mandela never ever did it for a throne, wants validation from all groups of people, races working together for prosperity. Castro's vote, ANC is a party. We came here to live life cause everybody is watching. He's got his country right behind him. If he falls, they got him. Learn from that failure, gain humility, and then we keep marching ourselves.
Go back, this is the moment. Today is the day. We'll fight till it's over. So we put our hands up. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us. Can't go back, this is the moment. Today is the day. We'll fight till it's over. So we put our hands up. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us.
Little by little, the apartheid establishment crumbled. After gradual reform, Nelson Mandela, imprisoned since not long after Sharpeville, was set free in 1990.
Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February.
4 years later, he was elected as South Africa's first black president.
Apartheid must go. Can't go back. This is the moment. Today is the day. We'll fight till it's over. So we put our hands up. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us. Can't go back. This is the moment. Today is the day. We'll fight till it's over. So we put our hands up. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us. 'Cause apartheid can't hold us.
Very nice curtain call, Srinivas. Beautiful.
And now we get into the South Africa with a
But
over to you,
Uh,
Milind.
Thank you. The last time, if all of you remember, we had a bookend at the end. Today we are trying out a bookend at the beginning of this session. So just to introduce the person I'm going to be talking with, Janaki Tambe is a resident and native of Atlanta, Georgia. She currently works in project management at Georgia Tech, where she manages more than 25 people and needs to exercise her sense of humor daily. She enjoys stand-up, sketch writing, and generally making people laugh. In this bookend, we listen to a conversation with Janaki, who's a good family friend of ours, who came to stand-up comedy in a very unexpected way. Janaki is extremely bright, having done her undergraduate work in economics and engineering from MIT. In fact, Abhijit Banerjee was one of her professors. Following up, she also got her MS in systems engineering from University of Southern California. She then worked in aerospace and defense before joining Lockheed Martin in Sunnyvale, California. It seems like a very unlikely background and place for stand-up comedy to happen, but a chance meeting with a friend and colleague who was interested in screenwriting got her acquainted with the writers and producers of American Pie, the movie that was a big hit in the early 2000s. They agreed to mentor her in screenwriting, noticing a funny bone in how well she already wrote very humorously. From there, she spent some time with filmmaking, but after returning to Atlanta to be with her family, found her passion in stand-up comedy. I've seen her perform, and she's of the same caliber as Karan, whom all of you will remember from his brief appearance earlier in our club. In this brief bookend, my searching questions receive some very interesting and at times surprising answers from her. So the bookend is about the making of stand-up comedians, and that was the conversation. So let's listen to it.
If you have a sense of fun within you, then stand-up comedy becomes more appealing, is my understanding. Would that be a fair statement?
So I may tend to disagree with that. Right, like they say, well, so they say comedy is tragedy plus time, right? So the best comics, I think, a lot of times are really stemming from a route that could be that could have taken a very dark turn. Trevor Noah is probably a really good example of that.
Absolutely. I was about to say that, you know, I'm reading the book and I've gone through barely 20 pages.
Yeah.
It's making me laugh, but all of that laughter is coming in the context of so much darkness around him in his life. So.
And I think that's true. I think that's true for almost everybody that really goes into stand-up. Now, there are a lot of people that we think of as stand-up now. So, like, Robin Williams, for example, who did some of my favorite stand-up that I've ever seen. And he's not a great example because he clearly has a very dark side as well. But and he suffered through a lot of addiction. But he actually, so as great a stand-up comic as he was, I think his start was a lot in acting and improv and in that route. So there's a couple of different routes you can do to get into comedy, but the pure stand-up comics, I think, are some of the most perceptive, just very perceptive, very observant, and they really do see the dark side either of themselves or humanity in general. Richard Pryor is another really good example. He grew up in a brothel. I don't know, like it's crazy, but then he developed during stand-up, he is taking this really dark piece of humanity, we're laughing at it, and then he's making us, like, making that space, knowing that line of, like, tragedy and getting people to feel okay to laugh is really what makes a really good stand-up. Maybe a way to think, you know, I don't know, there's a couple ways for someone, maybe like Trevor Noah to deal with that trauma. And he found the productive way is to turn it into a comedy career.
Absolutely. Yeah, you put that very well. Yes, I tend to agree with your opinion that it's not all coming out of fun.
It's difficult. And I think even if I looked at my own things, you're making light of it. So you don't know that I feel that way about it, but it's coming from a place, it could be very dark, and this is the way you deal with it. And those were your choices, is either to get depressed, angry, or to turn it into something that brings people together. Because the other interesting part, I think, about stand-up comedy is almost the darker you go and the deeper you go and the more specific you go into that trauma, it's actually the more people can relate to it. You think it's going to be less, but it's the more people can relate to it when you get very, very specific and you pick at that one thing from your past. So it's a way to really connect with the people around you too, right? And a lot of this, again, was before we could just find support groups on the internet. Let me talk about this, and the only place where it may be comfortable to talk about it is a comedy club.
He's a very strongly introverted person who doesn't otherwise talk much. But yet there is that strong force within, whether it's coming from a dark side or something traumatic that happened to them. They could still become very effective stand-up comedians, right? they could come alive in that context.
I think stand-up comics are overwhelmingly introverted, actually, because and one part of that is being extremely observant about the world around you, which is just, and again, it is actually a very, because when you're on that, it's you on a stage with a microphone. Some people do crowd work, which is going back and forth from the audience, but even that, you have to be very observant about the audience, about the world around you, and that's what introverts tend to do, is notice everything and have a very rich inner monologue. And that's what essentially stand-up is taking that inner monologue and putting it out there for people to hear. So it takes a different quality than, wanting to go out and talk to people. It takes a little bit of chutzpah, but it is, I think I would tend to say stand-ups are probably overwhelmingly introverted. They're here in the news about a stand-up comic suffering from severe depression. It actually makes complete sense to me, because
Robin Williams is an excellent example. Much of a persona he had, but that you couldn't easily connect to what was with it.
And a lot of time comics are so in tune, or really, very empathetic, right? That's part of what makes them understand the world around them, understand what will make people laugh. I think that can get dark sometimes, and they're so, so they're overly empathetic that you see a sad person. What you want to do, you want to make them laugh. And that's like your first reaction, is always trying to bring that out of other people. But so people kind of perceive those people as to be very just happy all the time. But that thing that made them notice that you were sad, that is the part, and then that makes you want to laugh. That is the part that people find it hard to understand.
Yeah, Milind, that's it.
Yeah. So that was just a brief glimpse of what goes into the making of stand-up comedians. And I thought it would be useful, because the book does not go into this aspect at all, in spite of the fact that Trevor Noah is a stand-up comedian. So with that, let's move on to the overview of the book from the reader of the month, and that would be Ajay today. And Ajay deserves kudos even before he speaks for the way in which he developed the briefs for his reflectors, and they all appreciated it a lot. His overview in that sense is important, in that it brings out the beauty of the book for all of us to see, preparing the stage for the reflections that follow. So with that, over to you, Ajay.
Thank you, Milind, and fellow book lovers. Before I get into the review of the book today, without the permission of Milind, I must add, I'm going to dwell a minute on the selection of the book. And I think it's interesting that the segue of Janaki has come in before that, because what I say now will probably come into that context to a certain extent. But after a few months of serious and heavy reading, Milind gave me strict instructions to pick something light and easy. And the task turned out to be a bit more challenging than I anticipated, primarily because it is a hard genre to pick from. But I decided to pick books from humorous autobiographies. I wanted to pick both female and male authors, but I failed in finding a female autobiography that I felt met the standards of this group. Just to give you some examples, I shortlisted comedic authors such as Shannon Moley, Amy Schumer, Caitlin Moran, and personally found their writing, at least in their books, that bit of the autobiography, a bit crass and both in style and language, which unfortunately it restricted me to finding books only by male authors. So in these days of extreme political correctness and gender equality, I do need to apologize for providing you a short list of all male authors to choose from. But if any of you have any recommendations on good female authors in the same genre, I'd be happy to receive that, and so would the book club. So with that said, I think the book selected by this group, which is the Trevor Noah's book, is the best of the three that were proposed. So now to the book itself, and Yanks, you're sharing the slide. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ajay. That was very useful. Go ahead.
Thanks. So Born a Crime primarily tells Trevor Noah's story. The book is an inspiring tale of survival and triumph, and Trevor's ability to rise above his circumstances defies societal expectations and carve his path in the world, and his ability to carve his path in the world is nothing short of remarkable. However, it is impossible to separate his narrative from the presence of his mother, Patricia Noah.
Hello. Hello.
Ajay, we cannot hear you.
Ajay has frozen.
Form a significant revelation in the book. Patricia's character and her experiences are deeply intertwined with Trevor's own journey, and her influence permeates every aspect of the book. In this sense, Born a Crime goes beyond a traditional autobiography by offering a heartfelt and intimate biography of Patricia, celebrating her as a central figure in Trevor Noah's life and a symbol of resilience and love in the face of adversity. Which is why I requested our reviewers to dwell on both aspects of the book as part of their review assessment of each of the three parts of the book. Next slide. The book commences with Trevor's childhood growing up in South Africa during the last years of apartheid. He explains that being born to a Black mother and a white father was a criminal act under the apartheid regime, hence the title Born a Crime. Trevor delves into the complexities of his existence as a mixed-race child. He describes how apartheid used race to divide people, and he uses the phrase apartheid as the way to describe how the British dealt with it. In part one, Trevor explores his childhood in South Africa during the last years of apartheid and challenges he faces as a mixed-race child born to a Black mother and a white father. Anu will share her thoughts on this part. In part two, Trevor narrates his adolescence and coming-of-age experiences. He reflects on the complexities of his mixed-race identity. Monty discusses this part of the book. And lastly, in the final part of the book, Trevor takes us through his transition into adulthood and his career in the entertainment industry. Gautam will finish the reviews with his insights of the last part. And you'll see the three stages of Trevor through the three stages of the photos that I found on one of the sites, which is quite remarkable as well. So to the last slide, Noah's writing style. Noah's writing style is accessible and engaging. He effortlessly weaves together personal anecdotes, political insights, and cultural observations. He creates a narrative that is both deeply and personal and universally relatable. The vivid descriptions transport us to the streets of Johannesburg, allowing us to experience the sights, sounds, and emotions alongside the author. Some shortcomings to me would be the limited focus on the other characters of the book, of his life in the book, and limited self-criticism of himself. The standout quality of this book is Noah's ability to infuse humor into his storytelling. Despite the often dire circumstances he faces, he manages to find moments of levity and uses comedy as a coping mechanism. His wit and charm shine through, offering a refreshing and engaging perspective on a tumultuous period in the South Africa's history. I found it to be an extremely enjoyable read. Thank you, and over to the other reviewers.
Thank you so much, Ajay. That was a very effective overview of the book, and I can identify with what Michiko Kakutani said in her review of the book in the New York Times. She said the book can be viewed as a love letter to his mother, Patricia, as well. And we will see a lot of that reflected in the reflections that follow. So the first reflection, as Ajay said, is from Anu about Trevor Noah as a child in a divided society with a protective mother. So Srinivas, let's get Anu.
A child in a
Speak.
divided society and a protective mother. Chapters 3 through 8. Chapter 3, Trevor, Pray. In this chapter, we meet Trevor's grandparents, his great-grandmother, his aunt and uncles, and his cousins. He describes a world where circumstances have forced women to take a major role in earning a living, raising the children, and holding the household and community together. He describes Soweto as something magical, where people built homes the way they buy eggs, a little at a time. While the homes were barely put together with bits of plywood and iron, the community bonded through prayer gatherings. Trevor's grandmother believed in the strength of Trevor's prayers because he prayed in English. I felt that by making Trevor feel important, she encouraged and engaged his active participation in these nightly prayer gatherings. One interesting episode in young Trevor's life involved the use of the outhouse. He decided to do his business on a newspaper in the main living area of the house. He quietly threw the dirty newspaper in the rubbish bin, way down, of course. The reaction of his mother and grandmother to the mess in the bin was that it was witchcraft. This incident spoke volumes about the simplicity, innocence, and the naivete of the community at large. Chapter 4, Chameleon. Trevor's next chapter includes an interesting insight about the role of language in separating people. He notes that people are generally suspicious of others who don't speak your tongue, and this aspect of human nature was exploited by the colonizers in South Africa. Appropriately titled Chameleon, the chapter focuses on how deftly Trevor and his mother adapted to different conditions thanks to their knowledge of several languages including English, Afrikaans, Xhosa, and Zulu. Bantu schools in each area taught students only the language of the tribes of that locality. The lack of ability to communicate with each other prevented blacks from understanding and developing friendships with each other. They viewed each other with suspicion and turned on each other rather than the colonizers. The educational and economic opportunities available to whites and blacks were distinctly different. Trevor was light-skinned and had the choice of studying with the mostly white students in advanced courses. However, he chose to join the black students in the less advanced programs because he felt a part of them. He had grown up in a close-knit family of black people and identified as black. This choice had to be made by a boy who was probably not yet a teen. This chapter had a more serious tone than the rest of the book. It is clear how hard young Trevor had to work to be accepted in a world where one was either black or white. Only his language skills enabled him to blend in with others who did not look exactly like him. Chapter 5, The Second Girl. The highest rung of what's possible is far beyond the world you can see. This was the gift given by Trevor's mother Patricia to Trevor. Milind, in his book club reminders, refers to the New York Times review of the book as a love letter to his mother. The love and strong bond shared by mother and son are vividly described in this chapter. Patricia's experiences as a child and young adult told her in no uncertain terms that she was not wanted. Undaunted by the harsh circumstances of her youth, she took every opportunity for advancement. Her self confidence and faith allowed her to create an environment for Trevor that allowed him to dream of a world quite unlike his reality. She instilled in him a deep love for reading and made sure she taught him how to think. The fact that Patricia did this years before apartheid was officially banned speaks to her foresight and her love for Trevor. Chapter 6: Loopholes. Patricia was a strict disciplinarian with her own ideas on what rules are appropriate and what are not. Her protective instincts are in full display when the school would not allow Trevor to participate in Eucharist since he was not Catholic. She supported young Trevor's question as to whether Jesus would have been denied his own blood and body as Jesus was not Catholic. She encouraged Trevor to question her, and they began writing letters to each other, presenting the logic for the action and the reaction. Systematically, Trevor's mother built in him a capacity to articulate his logic, to look beyond the obvious, and to be an independent thinker. Chapter 7: Foofy. Trevor's important insight that you don't own the thing that you love came from his experiences with his deaf dog Foofy. Foofy would climb out of the backyard, wander around, and come back every evening. Trevor followed her to another house in the neighborhood, but the boy there insisted that the dog was his. Ultimately, Trevor's mom paid for Foofy's return. Yet another instance where, quietly, Patricia did whatever was necessary to keep Trevor happy. Trevor calls Foofy his first heartbreak, who taught him an important lesson about life and love. Chapter 8: Robert. Patricia Noah made sure that her son, Trevor, knew his father and spent time with him. Until his father, Robert, moved away to Cape Town, Trevor visited him every Sunday afternoon. After losing touch with him for over a decade, Trevor's mom insisted that he get in touch with his father. When he finally located him, he had some trepidation about meeting him after so many years. However, to his delight, he found that his father had been keeping track of all his accomplishments. Robert's love for and pride in his son were evident. Patricia encouraged the relationship between father and son and made sure that Trevor heard that he had inherited important positive traits from his father and that he was loved and chosen by his dad. Trevor Noah was a child of mixed heritage when apartheid reigned in South Africa. Despite the challenges of race and poverty, Trevor grew up with the twin advantages of being able to think for himself and being able to forget instances of trauma and pain. These advantages can be singularly attributed to his strong, determined, loving mother. While Trevor turned out okay, I wonder why Patricia decided to have a child with a white man. In the era of apartheid, a child of mixed race might have a hard time finding a home, a place of belonging.
Excellent. Very good. Superb.
Now we move on to the next.
Wow, Monty.
Ah,
Lovely.
Very good.
I'm not sure where you got that picture from, but now the second part of the book, which is delving a little more into his adolescent years. What I found interesting was the very titles of the main chapters in part 2 of his memoirs, because it says it all about Noah's cheeky humor. There were very untypically long titles. A Young Man's Long, Awkward, Occasionally Tragic, and Frequently Humiliating Education in Affairs of the Heart. Part 1, Valentine's Day. Part 2, The Crush, and Part 3, The Dance. The elements of apartheid are sown all through the affairs of the heart for a colorblind outsider. No matter what race or creed we belong to, the teenage years with raging hormones are not the easiest to handle. Top that with institutional racism and different shades of chocolate, white, brown, black, dark, it definitely couldn't have been an easy ride for young Trevor. However, his mother's strong influence in his life probably pulled him through these awkward teenage challenges. She had given her son more than just survival. Against all odds, she gave him hope and humor. She made the brutality of life bearable with her tenacious heart, brave spirit, and sharp wit. Trevor felt he was the anomaly wherever he lived. In a white area, nobody looked like me. In a black area, nobody looked like me. In Eden Park, everyone looked like me, but we couldn't have been more different. Now, there's identity crisis for you, for a teenager. For a young man who's constantly feeling like an outsider, it was no surprise that he was over the moon when a cute colored girl walked up to him and asked if she could ride his brand new bike. Little did he know that he'd get robbed and she'd ride off with it. He was constantly bullied, with the incident at the mulberry tree being the worst of them, where all these kids pelted the shit out of him with berries. His ego was probably more bruised than his face. Personally, as a mother of 2 young boys, I could relate to all the worldly advice that Noah's mother gave him about the women who'd come into his life. While my advice used to often stop at, boys, make sure you don't get your girlfriends pregnant. Noah's mom's lessons were so preoccupied with teaching him how to be a man that she never really taught him how to be a boy. After learning the love bureaucracy of his school and being egged on by the other girls when he finally mustered up all his teenage courage to ask Maylene to be his Valentine, he really believed Cupid's arrow had finally struck. So imagine how devastating it would have been when on the day Maylene announced in a very matter-of-fact way that she could no longer be his Valentine, as the popular boy Leo had asked her to be his Valentine. Noah's resilience helped him to accept that while he sat alone in his classroom thinking, I understand, I'd have picked Leonardo over me too. Puberty wasn't kind to Noah, but Noah's lesson from the Valentine's Day heartbreak was that cool guys get girls and funny guys get to hang out with cool guys with their girls. First lesson in his career in comedy. So when this acne-ridden clown with duck feet and floppy shoes, who had the hugest crush on beautiful Zahira, finally picked up the courage to ask her for her phone number, it was quite a feat. He had a long-term plan, 2.5 years, to work on this relationship so that she could be his date to the metric dance. He was in no hurry, so imagine the shock after mid-year school holidays when he learned from her friend that Zahira was gone. She had left for America and that she had actually liked him all along. That was like 3 successive waves of heartbreak. Given his lack of success with girls, Noah resorted to other enterprising opportunities like starting a tuck shop business at school, selling pirated CDs made at home. By the end of high school, he had carved out his niche as an outsider and didn't worry about dating. But grade 12 prom was round the corner, and according to his American movies, prom is where it all happens. That's where you lose your virginity. So his search for a trophy date for this event began. He found the girl, bought himself some fashionable clothes, straightened and cornrowed his hair back, had Abel promised that he could borrow his BMW. It seemed perfect. And then it all went wrong. He couldn't get the BMW even after an hour of begging, was an hour late to pick up his date in the shitty Mazda, got completely lost on his way to the venue as he wasn't familiar with that part of town, and finally made it to the dance 2 hours late. All of this while his gorgeous date sat by his side in stony silence. And finally, at the venue, she refused to get out of the car. So he never made it to the dance, spent the entire evening in the parking lot, and drove her back home. While his friend Tim had promised to get him a gorgeous date, he hadn't warned him that she didn't speak English. And Trevor, with his excitement of his proposed date, had been so happy with her monosyllabic replies of yes and no, and finally, bye. At the same time, as he was discovering the complications of having relationships with, or at least attractions to young women, he was also discovering more about the depths and dangers of being from a mixed race. While the atrocities and hostility of apartheid were clearly evident in all aspects of Noah's life, I really appreciated the focus on the human aspect, more importantly, the strength of family and relationships. Noah's narration of his life story is refreshingly honest, but not burdened with signs of melancholy and self-pity, despite all that he was going through. It allows us to see how comedy didn't merely keep his family life alive, but flourish through great difficulties and adversaries. Given the story was not told chronologically, however, it tends to be a bit confusing at times as it jumps all over the place. And even by the end of the book, I couldn't quite put Noah's life on a timeline and never really discovered how he got into the career of comedy, stand-up comedy.
Great. Thank you so much, Pushpita. I found both Anu's and Pushpita's reflections really very comprehensive and doing justice to their briefs, particularly how Pushpita dealt with the complexities of Trevor's adolescence as well as his mixed race identity. So thank you both for those reflections.
Thank you. Thanks.
And, now we move on to the last reflection by Gautam on Noah's transition into adulthood. He becomes a young adult surviving in a dystopian society with the help of his inspirational mother. So with that, let's listen to Gautam.
Hi guys, sorry missing this event today. These are my reflections on Born a Crime, chapters 15 to 18. First, sharing a brief description of these 4 chapters. First is Go Hitler. This is the phase when as a young man Trevor makes money, tuck shop trade, making and creating and selling pirated CDs. Money means everything. Mother has sent him to a private school, fed him, that was her responsibility. Making money was his driver. There was no going to college, that was the preserve of the white elite in apartheid times. The cheese boys vis-a-vis the hoods. Those families that could afford to buy cheese and those that could not. Trevor was a hood, crook, not cheese, and he went deeper into the world of crime. He just hung out. That was his life. The world doesn't love you. Trevor spends a week in jail. Patricia overtly expresses the need to discipline him before the police does. When I beat you, I'm trying to save you. When they beat you, they're trying to kill you. And this isn't apartheid times, just a frightening reference to growing up in South Africa as a young man in the days after apartheid. And then finally, my mother's life. Patricia marries Abel with all his faults in order to bring some stability to her family life. But she finally leaves him. He's a domestic abuser, violent. And she leaves him with her 2 young sons by him, Andrew and Isaac. He beats her still. He comes back home and he beats her, and yet the police will not file charges. An awful glimpse at the woman's status in South African society then. Finally, he comes after her, shoots her, that she survives is a miracle. Trevor pays her hospital bill. He would have paid however much it was. That was his duty by his mother. Duty. It's interesting that Trevor does not know why she left Abel finally. Didn't care to ask her till the time of the writing of this book. He was busy doing shows, living his own life, having moved in with his cousin. The second thing that Ajay had asked me to speak on, the impact of apartheid, lack of dignity, inability to access education, the battle to just be able to put food on the table. Now, there are no apartheid horror stories here that one may have expected. These larger aspects nevertheless tell a sad story of overall deprivation. And it's not limited to apartheid, because the immediate post-apartheid period was even worse, lesser jobs, given that blacks had slavery jobs during apartheid. And the societal side of how boys were treated so much better than the girls in the families. Third, the role of the mother in shaping Trevor's life. Ajay identified the mother's role as inspirational in this phase, vis-a-vis protective when he was a child and supportive when he was a little older. She has him taken to jail for stealing batteries as a 10-year-old for a toy car. But then she doesn't tell him, but she pays his lawyer fees and bail amount to get him out of jail when he goes to jail for a week. Trevor and Patricia clearly were victims of apartheid, victims of abuse, but Trevor was never allowed to think that way. And he didn't see her life in that manner either. What is surprisingly missing and might easily have been inserted in the book is, number one, the book fleshes out no character other than that of Trevor, and to a lesser degree, Patricia. This makes the story somewhat incomplete. There's no fleshing out of Bolo, the only Chinese in the book, which would have been interesting because there couldn't have been so many Chinese in South Africa those days. Doesn't flesh out Andrew, white, an opportunity to profile a white person. Then also the dancer, Hitler, black, different from the colored Trevor, not even his own brothers. So the book, to my mind, is actually all and only about Trevor, and in some bits his mother, Patricia. Some important bits I feel are left out, yawning gaps I find in the book. The most evident is the progression of Trevor to become a comedian, something that must surely have taken some doing, evidenced by his future success in that role. He was the sole speaker at the White House Correspondents' Dinner 2022, and he ran a daily show on Comedy Central. He must have done some of the hard work for that, what we have identified as the 10,000 hours in The Outlier, while in South Africa. Then I find Trevor's upbringing as a colored person in South Africa is also fairly sketchy from the perspective of his family life. We don't really get to see how he lived his life. Yes, there are instances where he had to stay inside and not mix with the other kids when staying in his grandma's house, even in his own house. The references to domestic violence are, of course, fairly detailed, but that could really have been in any society. It's prevalent across the world. Finally, as an aside, what I found charming were some wonderful quotes interspersed through these chapters. One that I remember well is, people don't want to be rich, they want to be able to choose, which I thought was very nice. And the other was, white people have insurance, so you're not really stealing from them as a hood, because the insurance company reimburses them. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Gautam. I found Gautam's critique very insightful. He points out what else would have been very nice to read in the book, and which is why I think the conversation with Janaki at the beginning sort of complements what is missing. I'm reminded that Anu also raised a question which might be a good motivation for our open session, and that is, she asks, what made Patricia marry Robert in spite of knowing that it was clearly an illegal act? And if there are any thoughts on that, it would be interesting to listen to them as well. So with that, and with those excellent reflections, let's move on to our open discussion on Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. So those in the audience might want to take the lead.
thought the last chapter on, the shooting was really quite dramatic. The way he describes it. I mean, just can you imagine the bullet going through her skull? Going through her body, through the car. I mean, like unbelievably miraculous that she survives. Think about it. Right?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
If I can just build on Ravi's point, so one of the things that struck me enormously was the last chapter as well. And I think in some ways, from my own personal experience, it sort of reflects the maturity of Trevor Noah, as some of us had probably had in our own personal lives, from a deep skepticism about faith and religion, to one day at least opening a little sense of maybe there is more out there than I understand and know. And just the series of coincidences that happened to his mother in that final concluding chapter, and how difficult it would have been, and yet to see his mother's, unresolute faith in her religion and the strength it brought to her was, I think, also a sense of reflection. The way he put it, without actually going overboard, I thought was very balanced and very well done.
And to add to that was her humor when he says, well, your Jesus didn't come to pay the hospital bills. And she says, well, he gave me a son who paid.
Very nice. Yeah, I agree. It was like very brilliantly done. I agree.
Yeah, it's obvious where he gets his wit from, actually.
Yeah. The mother finally converted to Judaism. She's no longer a Catholic.
Any thoughts on why she would have married Robert?
I think she probably felt a white child would have a better perspectives in that environment.
Marry Robert? Did she marry him?
She just had a child.
She was very clear she was not going to marry him.
I felt there was some streak of rebelliousness in her as she talked about, this is my country. Why should anybody else? I'll do this my way. And it was almost as though she, knowing that it was a crime, knowing she would have difficulties to hide him, and she did that, but she still went ahead with it. It was almost like not accepting the way things were. It was her own way of protesting.
I agree with that. I was thinking the same thing, and that it stemmed. A lot of what she did stemmed from a streak of, I will do what I want to do, what I believe in, and not worry about the consequences. That's the sense that I got.
The question that Gautam raised, that how did he become a comedian? That's very scanty. I mean, the actual steps on how he moved out of South Africa, the reading on him does say that he hosted a show in South Africa. And then he was picked up in the US, but it's unusual. I mean, I wonder how that happened. Does anybody know?
No, it doesn't come up in any of his background material.
So if you read about him on Wikipedia, he definitely started doing stand-up type of shows in South Africa itself.
True, but how did he come to the US is not very clear.
It is clear if you read the Wikipedia. I may not be able to tell you right now, but the Wikipedia tells very clearly how he was picked up. In his profile, they talk about it.
I tried to read it, Sandeep. I couldn't get a sense. I was curious to understand in 10 years, his life transformed from, doing some shady little stuff in South Africa to becoming one of the sort of comedians of, I would say, the top 10 or 20 in the US.
The Daily Show is like an institution, right? Anyone who's does the Daily Show just becomes by definition a celebrity. But how did he become? How did he get there?
But the amazing thing is that not only did he get there, but he also left it. And I thought those were the most inspirational comments. If you read the bit about why he left the Daily Show. He just announced and he said, unlike Americans who want things to just go on forever and ever, I feel that everything has to come to an end.
Yeah.
And I've had.
I mean, we watched that episode on TV. It was kind of fun, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we had tears in our eyes because we just love the show. You know, it's just so cool.
And he made it quite fast. It's not even 10 years. It's about 5 years. I mean, I found it a little strange. At the ripe old age of 30, he writes a memoir.
Yeah, absolutely. No, like Gautam quoted him, you know, a couple of powerful quotes that Gautam used. Similarly, I think the interview with Cory Booker that Sandeep had shared also makes for a very good and interesting listening. So if you haven't listened to it, it's rather long, but very rewarding.
Yeah, and that's where that quote, which I inserted in my last slide about him being his punk-ass sidekick of the mother came. I think he gave it in that interview.
Yeah.
He also did, in his last few shows, he did a really good set of episodes from Georgia. And you know, he went around Atlanta, you know, your area, Milind, and interviewed all kinds of interesting people on the streets and in these eateries, and you know, it's yeah. I think
it just tells you how serious as thinkers all these stand-up comedians are. I had the good fortune to listen to John Oliver in Atlanta, and it's brilliant. For 2 hours, the man just stands on the stage, nothing in hand, and he doesn't borrow from anything he has said before, but he kept us laughing for 2 hours. So that's the power of what they bring to us.
We have a very young stand-up comedian in Australia from Sri Lanka, and he started his series by which he called Fear of the Brown Planet. And he talks of the times that'll come when there'll be more brown people than white people. And he goes through the whole thing of Fear of the Brown Planet and says there'll be more of us than there will be of you. And he did really well. He's a TV personality now, and he's doing really
What's
well.
his name? This comedian?
Nazim Hussain. He was my older son Sid's batchmate from school, and just chose to go into stand-up comedy.
So a lot of you must have watched the Hassan Minhaj thing. Yeah? I mean, that I find him also very perceptive.
He's very good. He's very good.
He's good.
Yeah.
So is Ansari.
By the way, he hosted the Daily Show for a week.
I know. I saw that.
I think one of the funniest things I found about color of the skin was the grandmother who hated to beat the child. Said she wouldn't beat the child because she said, when I beat black people, nothing happens. They don't change color. But if you beat your son, he goes all sorts of colors. And I thought that was hilarious. I mean, it was so, nothing happens to black people when you beat them. They just remain black.
Also, her way of encouraging him that, you know, you pray in English. So that is important. So please pray.
Can I add a comment about Milind, your original question about why does she? I think the point of the way I see it is that you can have laws that say you can't do this, you can't do that, but human nature is human nature, and where human nature is concerned, you know, to me is very clear. There wasn't hatred in the relationship. Others, she wouldn't have asked her son to go find her father. No. So I think this is one of those classic cases where they came together. Yes, it was also an. The third part of it is that is with whom she had the baby. Coming from Switzerland, this her father, I would imagine they're from the little bit that I've lived there for a short period of time, they're very open-minded. After the US, that's one of the few places which by law welcomes immigrants. It's a different matter today, but I'm just talking, theoretically speaking. So there would have been a greater degree of open-mindedness compared to, say, her sleeping with a Dutch or an African or, person. I was very fortunate to have a very good friend who was actually South African, when we were in Geneva and 10th century. And in a way, there was a big schism also between the English and the Dutch in South Africa. The Dutch, or their Dutch roots, were more apartheid oriented, and the English coming from England, I'm not talking to people who are already there, were a little more broad-minded because they were just given independence in their colonial perspective. So even that sort of, there wasn't this broad brush approach. So my sense is if she had to sleep with somebody and it was consensual, it would be either English or European and not Afrikaans. And that's why she encouraged her son to keep in touch with the father. That's my 2 cents there to your original questions.
Clearly a very brave woman for her time.
No, I wouldn't say brave woman because she slept with a white guy. She was basically...
No, not only that, overall, as a person, overall, a very brave person to bring up Trevor the way she brought him up.
I think,
just to counter that point though, Rama, wasn't she renting a room from that guy, Robert? I mean, it was a matter of convenience that she was in the same house. I don't think she went around choosing it.
No, the point I'm making is that you can rent a room and yet not want to have a relationship, if say it was with somebody else. You're right, if he was a landlord, it could have, you're right about that part. Because if he was a landlord, you don't really know how much is kind of compulsion or force versus having a consensual relationship. But
from how he describes his mother, she probably chose a Swiss guy.
Sorry?
From how he describes his mother, he probably chose a Swiss guy.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
Yes.
That's what I
Most
thought.
definitely.
Because a strong woman should have chosen to do it rather than, hey, I got no choice kind of stuff.
No, she very much chose.
Yeah.
But Nishan, I think he got a Swiss citizenship because of the father.
Of course.
That's right. I mean, there's some role of the Swiss.
That is how he came to the goal.
It's not that simple. The last 10 years of his life.
Not in last. He went to the Swiss embassy and asked them to hunt the guy down.
Yes.
And Switzerland is also a police state. Everyone knows everyone.
Right.
Especially if you're a man. So they would have tracked the guy down and said, what are you doing? And you saw that how his father was very supportive of him when he had a problem.
Yeah.
So to me, it's not surprising the track that Trevor Noah took post South Africa. But I think what is more admirable is what I thought was what a cool hustler he was. He was just incredible. He just hustled his way out of literally everything. I would say wore his Timberland boots and goes rapping and speaks in English when nobody else knows, speaks 5 languages. Man, this guy's out of this world, Really, I thought, and that's why
his language skills started off as a coping mechanism, and then that became his strongest asset as a comedian.
He does a great Indian accent too.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's all sorts of great accents.
There's a show, there's an episode that he does.
About Russians and Indians. I love that one.
And I love that sentence. I love that quote from him where he said that language is what can divide or can bring people together. So if you speak somebody else's language, they think you're part of them. I thought that was so insightful. And maybe the Indian facility with so many languages or people who are linguists, we have some of those people, they do tend to sort of integrate with you and connect with you in a very different way.
In fact,
Well,
there's
Miss
a
Anjali, see what I
paragraph.
noticed of late, there are lots of talent coming up in Indian stand-up comedians. I don't know whether any of you are seeing it.
Yes.
And earlier it used to be very linear and monochromatic, and most of them are sexist and rebellious type of a thing. But of late, I think there's a lot of talent coming up. And if you have time, you check out with a few people. And I think there is a lot of insights coming up, and there are good quality people are coming up. There are some people are from IITs and some people are from different genres, different types. They just love to do this. And there are a lot of comedy theaters also available in all the cities. So we can just go there and so what was there in US, I think now it's come to India.
Led by our very own
Sharma
Ulay.
show, the
comedians in
Kapil
India,
Sharma show
I
has raised the
focus-
bar for everybody. Kapil Sharma.
I think
Kapil
it
Sharma
is-
is a different type. I mean, Kapil Sharma is more
We-
moved onto the
He's raised the
Bollywood
bar,
infected. Yeah, but no, I think I wouldn't agree with that. I think that there's a local raw talent has come up now. I think there is some sort of a osmosis happened, and they are able to connect up with the normal people, different types of sections of people. So you just check out that. I think it is interesting.
No,
I think
It's
the beauty of
interesting
comedians
to
in
see.
India, I think the beauty of
I-
comedians in India is not just the fact that it's not sexist. But what I find is that the women comedians come up with far more intellectual and piercing humor than, let's say, women comedians in the US. Because the two leading women comedians in the US, there's a South Korean original, lady of South Korean origin, as well as Mindy Kaling, or even for that matter, what's her name, Lily Singh. It's
Amy
I find
Schumer.
it very crass, to be honest. Have you guys watched Lily Singh? Have you watched?
I have.
Yeah. So when you see
Ajay,
Not
I
in the
think
same
you
class.
comment at the
vast
beginning
period.
where you were finding it difficult to find female comedians who don't use crass language. And I think it probably came to be because stand-up comedy was such a so dominated by males that women probably thought that one way of being accepted in this was to use language that guys tend to use so freely. And they almost went overboard in doing that. Whereas in today's world, women are a lot more comfortable in their own identity and don't have to fight the world as much as perhaps our generation did.
Yeah,
And
and that's a
they're
very good point, Monty, because I think especially from an Australian angle, some of the best comedians in Australia, especially on the ABC national broadcasters, are female. I love their humor. I mean, absolutely magnificent humor as compared to the males in their same caliber. So,
yeah.
but
And
the issue I
forgetting
had was
the-
looking at this autobiography. So if you just Google comedian autobiographies, you get some top 10, 20 books, several of them female, but I picked about 4 or 5 of them. All of them were absolutely crass from the chapter 1. I mean, I couldn't just digest it. I didn't think everybody in this book club would be happy with me selecting or recommending those books. So.
There is an Indian comedian. She's a lady, I think, from Karnataka. She does an
Oh,
excellent job.
fabulous.
I know.
Man,
I've subscribed to her. She's fantastic,
Yeah, I was just typing out that, Milind. I think that, yeah, she's good. I was just typing out that. name. Yeah.
Yes.
There is an Aditi Mittal as well.
Ayush
who's pretty good.
Shraddha.
Ayush
Yeah,
Shraddha.
Shraddha, that's
Ayush
right.
Shraddha.
But
Yeah.
but she's
Outstanding.
She's good. She's good. Yeah.
but does she do stand-up comedies or does she just do the clips?
Does
Because she
stand-up
does those
comedy.
clips.
She does stand up as well.
Okay.
She does the stand up, she does the commercials. I mean, now she's diversified into many things.
Yeah.
Well, there's
a
one
male
called by the
comedian.
name of Aditi Mittal, who was on BBC as well. So
There's a male comedian who does, sometimes very bright things. I like him. He's Amit Tandon.
Amit
Have
Tandon.
you? Yeah.
Yes, he's good.
Yeah, he's another one.
Let
And
me
then
be
there's
naughty.
Khatri also. Khatri also does a good job. What Khatri? Some Khatri, I forget his name.
is Tandon an IIT Delhi guy? I thought
No,
he
no.
was.
I don't think.
No, no.
No.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said that because IIT Delhi guys don't have a sense of humor today.
Ooh, all right.
Somebody has to defend IIT Delhi.
I was falling asleep, Ajay. Now you've woken me up. I was about to press on saying good night to you, and now you pressed the wrong button.
Now, there are a lot of Hindi comedians who are doing stand-up in Hindi now. And they're very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Not only limited to English.
I think
I have a friend's son who's gone full-time into this.
I see.
Completely.
By the way,
one of the
if any of
people
you
who
haven't looked at the chat, then I've put in my recommendation. It's a really nice show. Sharat has watched it.
I
It's
watched
the
it. I love
marvelous
it.
Mrs. Maisel.
Very nice.
It's really
Maurice.
good fun.
I think one of the people who missed a good opportunity to be a stand-up comedy person from our batch is Maurice.
Yes.
You have it.
She
in
does it
you,
for private
girl.
audiences like us.
We haven't seen them, Maurice. Come on.
It comes so
Maurice.
naturally to you.
Yeah, what is this? Only with the ladies, is
What's
it?
this, you know?
Only with the ladies.
Come on. Only for these specials. We are all hoi polloi, I know, but we also have a sense of humor. We'll laugh whenever you tell us to laugh.
You will. I'm sure you will.
The duo of Monty and Maurice together is unbeatable. And then hearing Sudha laugh to that is just unforgettable.
Sorry, Anjali, what happens in Bordeaux stays in Bordeaux.
No. Sangeeta, let Anjali free reign. We want to hear more. Even though it's taking after what I know, 30 years or 40 years.
But that was quite
Good,
a coup that all 10 of you got together in Bordeaux that year. That was fascinating.
Absolutely.
National Enquirer's logo or motto was "Inquiring minds want to know."
Not that the
There are a
nation
lot
wants
of
to know.
inquiring minds here.
I seem to remember that when we were on campus, Monty and team did some sort of competition on all the different body parts and what were the men with the
Monty.
fingers.
Monty.
I
do
not remember.
Monty. Or is this what is called selective amnesia?
Anybody has the latest update on Sudha?
Yeah, I spoke to her, exchanged some messages a couple of days back. She's on a good track right now, from what I heard. She told us.
Some tests. It's getting better, but at a very slow pace.
She told us that Ram is definitely being husband of the year, making tater tots and omelets and basically looking after her very well, yes, which is wonderful. Yeah.
Excellent.
Guys, I'm going to drop off. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Good seeing you all. Take
Okay.
care.
Everyone, watch the news.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
I just want to tell all of you that the next book I've started reading, The Good Shufu, and it's another promising book. So please start reading it for next time.
It's a very
Is
small
that the book for the next month?
Very small.
Yeah, it's a book by Tracy Slater that Anu as ROM has chosen for us. And it's very good. So
Yeah, I've got the book. I'm looking forward to reading it now.
Looking forward to it, yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
The only problem with the book is
Congratulations on the NVIDIA Zoom. That's a great kind of last 3 months quarter you guys have had. Yeah. Excitement all around.
I couldn't possibly comment, Ishan. Now we just have to deliver yet another record quarter. And notice the quarter is now in double-digit billions, right?
Yeah, just tell us whether it's worth buying the stock at this price.
I think the recording button.
We are recording this.
It's on record, please.
Recording button is still on. Yes. Okay.